So if you've been in Poland since 2011 or at any time after 2011, when it comes to mobile phones, oh, and by the way, let's get this out of the way right now. Mobile cell phones, you know what I'm talking about. The little thing in your pocket right now, right? I was expecting a joke from somebody to know.
Yeah,
nobody?
no, we thought we just let that one.
Nobody? Okay.
In my pocket.
Oh, nice. Anyway, the mobile. I'm going to say cell phone. Josh, you say mobile phone. Mike, what do you say? What do you say?
Actually, I will probably say cell phone is my first thing to say, or just say iPhone.
In Austria, they call them a handy.
Oh, the Germans, they call them handys.
Oh, really?
It's like Germans, you're thinking like they're invading the whole world, arch nemesis of goodness, and they just sound so gay saying,
I just look for your number in my handy.
Anyway, cell phones. In the world of cell phones, everything's been pretty stable. There are 4 major networks, of course, T-Mobile, Orange, Play, and Plus. And it's been that way since, as I said, 2011. But if you've been in Poland for a longer time, this year will be 24 years for me, I think. Yeah, August of 98 to 24 years. If you were here before 2011, you remember a time when there was a lot of movement, a lot of changes, constant rebranding and brands being acquired by bigger brands and launching sub-brands. It was really complicated to follow all the different names.
Exciting life on the digital frontier.
In the world of cell phones. And that's what we're here to talk about today in this KrakCast short history of cell phones in Poland. We have to go back to the beginning, which in this case, 1992, which was when the commercial launch of a company called Centertel took place. Now, Centertel was the mobile phone branch of TPSA, Telekomunikacja Polska, what's Spółka, like limited liability, LLC, basically. It was the government. Now, TPSA was the state-owned telecommunications company, and even after 1989, 1990, it was still majority state-owned. They sold a minority share to foreign investors, but it was still the government. And as an Eastern Bloc state-owned telecommunications company, TPSA was not in a position to deploy technology that they really had nothing to do with developing, weren't familiar with it and whatnot. So they established this branch, again, called Centertel. And Centertel brought in 2 foreign companies, the American giant AT&T and the French company Orange, which is the same Orange that we have today.
It was France Telecom back then.
We'll come back to them later. So together, the 3 companies, again, Centertel, also known as the government, AT&T and Orange, they deployed the network that supported the Centertel brand. And this is the time when, this is interesting, mostly for cost reasons, the Centertel network, the physical network that they used, it was a standard. Now, this is over my head. Josh, you might know something about this, but this is well over my head. The network they used was called the NMT 450i standard. Does that mean anything to you?
Oh, yes, of course it does.
No, of course it does.
I mean, this is one step up from tin cans and string,
basically. Yeah, this is basically kind of like smoke signals.
Cutting the string.
Yeah. So the NMT 450i standard. And the funny thing about this standard was that it was transmitted using analog FM modulation without any encryption, which meant that it was possible to eavesdrop on conversations.
I mean, you had this in the U.S., especially at the beginning with analog phones, that, if you had your radio like at the right frequency, you could listen to your neighbors.
If you were close enough and you were listening on the right frequency, you could listen to conversations, which kind of funny.
Yeah, actually, it's probably worth doing a little sidebar about how utterly pathetic the United States kind of rollout of mobile phone technology was in the early days.
You want to go that way, huh?
I think this is something that Britain often gets because it was in Britain they often say we did it first, we did it worst. In the U.S. it was kind of that when it came to like mobile operators, cell phone operators. They really introduced the first wired networks in the U.S. So when new technology showed up a few years later, like, well, we're not going to upgrade. We just spent $10 billion on this.
In this huge freaking country.
Yeah, so, give us a moment.
Different realities. But anyway, going back to the early 90s in Poland, this is a time, of course, when the phones then cost more in constant dollars than high-end iPhones cost now. I mean, this is the days of the brick, basically. You remember Wall Street with Michael Douglas. This is the 1987 movie, and remember that huge bricky. This was cool. This is like the Titans of Wall Street were using these huge phones.
And you'd see those bricks, but what you didn't so often see in the movies was the even larger battery pack that you had to have like dangling from your waist like a cop's nightstick.
So by 1995, there were about 50,000 customers in the entire country, 50,000 customers, the vast majority of whom concentrated in Warsaw, obviously. Now, this is not a very impressive number. However, the growth rate was impressive, and it was on track to, double every so often. And, of course, everybody involved, from the technical side to the financial side to the politicians, they knew that conditions in Poland were changing rapidly, and Poland would follow in the footsteps set by other markets, and the cell phones would become a thing. And so, humble beginnings, but again, they knew the potential was there. Now, Sintertel, again, the government, they were a monopoly on cell phone operators until 1996, and that's when Polkomtel, doing business under the Plus name, they're still around today.
GSM, yeah.
They got the first license to use the 900 megahertz. Is that the right word? Megahertz?
That's where we're going. GSM.
The first license to use the 900 megahertz band. In the same month, this is February 1996, another license was granted to Polska Telefonia Cyfrowa, which operated under the brand of ERA. The ERA network, right? So we went from having Sintertel to having Sintertel, Plus, and ERA. This is 1996, again. Now, at the beginning, again, service concentrated in Warsaw and about 10 or 12 of the largest cities in Poland. After about a year of operating, though, the Plus network was available in about 200 cities and the larger towns. Any town over 5,000 inhabitants. So the small towns are still kind of, oh well, sorry. You have to wait. Basically, that was the approach. I mean, it's forgivable. It's kind of understandable.
Is a substantial town. God, I mean, that's
not big enough. Well, I guess you have to. I mean, it sucks, but at the same time, you understand they have to prioritize. They can only roll out these cell phone towers so quickly. They only have so many of them.
It's about your definition of town, really. I mean, I think 5,000 is kind of like what a village is, really.
Not my definition. Just said, in the official history of Plus, they say towns.
Okay.
Are we going to argue about the definition of town?
Well, we could do. It depends.
City, village, municipality, yeah. I mean, maybe fighting words.
But both of these new networks, ERA and Plus, they also concentrated their network along the major traffic arteries in the country as well. They understood, of course, people drive from city to city.
The motorways, you mean?
And, the motorways, such as they were in 1996. Actually, such as they are today, really. But, so basically the situation in 96 is you have, again, the government, these two private companies, and their entire networks are physically concentrated in the bigger cities and towns, whatever your definition of town may be, and the roads that connected them. So this resulted in the fact that about 40% of the country, like territorially, 40% of the land mass of the country was covered, and about 60% of the people. So, Dr. Mike, fair, not fair? Oh, well, that's how it is.
At the time, I think it's completely reasonable and understandable, yeah.
I don't think most people cared that they were missing out. I think in 1996, most people were not thinking, I can't wait to get a phone.
I got it for Christmas. I'm like, what do I do with this? I don't have any friends. I mean, I was still at the point. I remember we had a mutual friend of mine who a few years later was the only person I knew who didn't have a cell phone. And I remember calling him on his landline, and my normal reaction always, my introduction was like, hey man, where are you? It's like, you're calling me on my landline. He was one of the last people I knew that had a landline, Mark. But just 4 years earlier, I knew nobody with a cell phone. It was one of those markets that just really exploded. So it's like, you didn't realize you were missing out or anything, that you needed something until you actually had it.
I remember like in the mid-90s when I bought myself a van and kind of decided to set myself up as a kind of man with van, I suppose. And
a plan.
Yeah, of course. Although that part was pretty sketchy, I think. But after a few months of doing this, I got kind of to know this guy who was also a man with a van who was doing a lot of business around Camden Market in London. And he said, Josh, have you got a mobile phone? And I said, no, why? He goes, get yourself a mobile phone, and any jobs that I can't do, I'll pass your way. So I was like, oh, goodness me. So I went out and kind of thought, I better get myself a mobile phone. So I bought myself this Motorola flip thing. And and I remember, if I had like a longish job taking me out along one of the motorways, and you'd have this thing in its little clip, because I'd also bought a hands-free cradle, of course, being a diligent and careful driver. And, you'd have the signal strength bars, and they would kind of, they would move in and out, and, there'd be whole stretches along the M1 or the M4 where you just were out of luck, if you wanted to make a call.
And today people go camping in the remote areas and get mad if they don't have 5 bars. We still have bars, right?
No, but actually you say that, but I have relatives who live in the southwest of England, and they live in a small village in a valley. And actually, I don't know what it's like today, because it's a few years since I visited them, but certainly even in sort of 2012, 2015, in their house, you couldn't get a mobile signal.
I mean, there's also an issue is like, when you're in more remote areas, you might get a signal when you're out in the street, but as soon as you go in a building or any place with obstruction, you lose that signal, because it's not like in an urban environment where we have several towers from several directions. They might just have one tower. So, when you're out in the open, you get a signal, but as soon as you're anywhere with obstruction, it's gone. And also, a lot of people might not have noticed, but last spring, when there was like all those thunderstorms, I started noticing that my cell connection really sucked. And it wasn't until a few months later I was talking to some guy at Orange who said, like, yeah, we lost a lot of towers during the spring, the thunderstorm
like physically
season.
lost.
Physically lost.
Wow.
And they had to build up basically. But the plus was that when they were installing the newer towers, all of a sudden I've noticed that like I didn't have a connection or I had a weak connection in my apartment for a while. Now I have a better connection, and it's 3 times faster than it used to be, because when they were installing equipment, it was the newest equipment.
Let's go back to our history here.
Yeah.
1998 was a big year in Poland for a couple of reasons. First of all, Centertel, again the government, rebranded as Idea, right? So big deal, because this would be a name that would become more familiar to a new generation of people.
You have to assemble the phone yourself,
and would no, but Idea. What is that? Is that a stupid name for a company, by the way? Idea. Looking back, it seems like a weird choice.
Orange.
Okay, I get it.
A piece of fruit. I mean,
one syllable or short words, but idea, you have an idea. What is? Okay, anyway. So Centertel was rebranded as Idea, but the really big change in 1998 was that the other two companies, Era and Plus, introduced prepaid cards. Because up until then, there was no such thing. You had it on an abonnement or a subscription. Now, this is a big deal for a couple of reasons. First of all, in 1998, there were basically no mechanisms to check your credit worthiness. And so the result was that the banks and other lenders just assumed you were not creditworthy and you didn't get whatever you wanted. To get a phone at that time, basically you had to be a business owner, or you had to be, Mike, can you think of any other criteria that would automatically make it easy? Because for most people, even if they could, provide evidence of their, financial status, they were not eligible to get credit in the form of a phone that they would pay for at the end of the month.
I mean, you could vykombinować something, little teaser there.
Yeah.
But that's true. It's like most phones were people who were somehow associated with businesses or companies. My first phone was only because my dad, was part of a law firm, and he got a couple of numbers. So, I got a number, my mom got a number in that sense.
But otherwise, it would have been difficult if he wasn't part of the business. So, so it expands the available customer client pool, basically. So it makes it also makes it easier to control your expenses. This was a big problem. I can remember this when I had my first phone here. You would get really unwelcome, shocking surprises at the end of the month when you found out how much your phone bill was, because the subscription packages at that time would give you some laughably low number of minutes or text messages or whatever included in what you paid. And then, of course, when you exceeded that limit, you paid per message or per minute or whatever. And you could get, as I said, just shocking phone bills. And so the whole prepaid model, of course, allowed people to put a cap on how much money they spent.
That's true. It's like my wife had prepaid for years, mainly because it just meant, monitoring costs was easy. She didn't have to think about it. You pump into 20, 30 zlotys per month. You've got a phone, people can call you. and you don't have to worry about it. And it wasn't even that people were being cheap. It was just like you didn't have that mental like hassle or stress of worrying about another bill in your life.
1999, we're following our timeline here. 1999 was a interesting year because now it's easy for us to laugh at this technology, but at the time it was a big deal. But in 1999, something called GPRS, General Packet Radio Service, was first integrated with Polish mobile networks.
Wow.
This is a data transmission platform. Today we talk about 5G. GPRS was 1G, or just G, basically. I don't know what we called it at the time. I don't know if we had G at the time, but this was 1G. And of course, over the next 15 years, Poland would be just behind other markets implementing.
Wasn't this the technology that allowed you to
Gs.
send text messages, actually?
No, text message was GSM. That was actually a lot earlier.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So in Poland you could send, but the thing is in Poland, that was basically 2G. So like when you switched to digital, that allowed text messages.
2004 was a big year because ERA, again, one of the big three. Of course, at this time, the big three are Idea, Plus, and ERA. ERA launches a sub-brand called Heya. Heya, Heya. And anybody who was there at the time remembers that red hand. Their logo was a red hand. It was everywhere.
Big shiny red rubber glove, wasn't it?
Yes. It was like a Mickey Mouse hand, like a big, fat fingers and
the
stuff
voice
like that.
in the ads for Heya was like this, like, teenager who didn't care. It's like, Heya.
Heya.
If you ever remember the Tango ads on British TV in the late 90s, then you...
No, it's the same thing.
Well, yeah, it was a big orange hand, in fact, but that, of course, wouldn't work because orange is, all right.
So in addition, Heya, by the way, is prepaid only. So it delivers all the conveniences we just talked about with prepaid, and it's very obviously targeted at the youth market, right? People who can't afford subscription plans on other networks and whatnot, maybe people who can't get their parents' help or don't want their parents to know they have a phone. You can just buy a cheap phone and a Heya card and you're set up and you're in business. Heya's big deal was, this was like revolutionary at the time, 3 grosze for text messages to other numbers on the Heya network, which of course encouraged everybody to be on the same network as their plans.
People,
as their friends, rather.
High schoolers, yeah.
Exactly. So again, if you weren't around at the time, it's hard to make you understand just how ubiquitous, everywhere. Heya was everywhere, and Heya was annoying and in your face and over the top. It was like Mountain Dew advertising, or Red Bull advertising. Basically, it was the same market.
Mountain Dew,
extremely irritating. Let's see, 2005. Okay, here comes the beginning of some shuffling. Idea in 2005. Idea becomes Orange, or more accurately, Orange buys Idea. So Idea existed as a brand on the Polish market for 7 years, from 98 to 2005. And Orange is still, 17 years later, Orange is still going strong. We'll talk about some numbers in just a minute to give you an idea of just how strong they are. 2007, another big year, because this is when the Polish government decided that the cell phone market was mature enough to support a fourth entry into the market again. Until this time, there's 3 Idea, which became Orange, and ERA, and Plus. So the Polish government decides to sell a 4th license, and they sell it to the French company Play, which is actually on the corporate level, I think is called P4. Is that what it's called? Let me see.
Yeah, on the corporate level is P4. It's like they had one other name before that, but the mobile operator was like P4.
And they have Dr. Mike, we were talking about this before we started recording. Play and P4 has a very murky, complicated, frankly dodgy
there were rumors that right at the beginning
business
there was a lot
setup.
of Chinese money and banks giving them credit, and Huawei was where they got the equipment from, and it was actually like a multinational corporation of like an Icelandic company and a British company that had their base in Luxembourg, and they started up with this money. But now, years and years later, they ended up getting bought out by the French company, not Lionel or Enel or something like that.
Don't know. But anyway, Play positions themselves as the low-cost choice. And their advertisements were not as irritating as Heya, but they were everywhere. Every surface was plastered with a Play, whatever. What is that milk, that kind of...
They were
blob. What is that?
They were one of the first companies to realize you don't need to actually have a logo that looks anything. Just have a logo
it just has. Yeah. What is that thing on the Play logo? What is that?
It really looks like a made-up symbol.
It looks like a blob of mercury that's dipped in purple paint or something.
They actually come with a corporate company, a color as well. So they had purple. So Orange had obviously orange. Play had like green. ERA, I think, had more like blue.
ERA was blue, and Plus has that green and red plus sign or something like that. So again, Play is emphasizing their price point, which forces the other operators to reduce their prices, and so this is the beginning of the end of like really, really high costs for having a cell phone in Poland. Thankfully, in 2011, Era was bought by T-Mobile. So previously, Centratel was bought by Orange, and now Era is bought by T-Mobile. So now, in 2007, we have T-Mobile, formerly Idea. We have, T-Mobile, formerly Era. We have Orange, formerly Idea. We have Plus, and we have Play. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yes, I did. Okay, thank you. That was 2011. In other words, leading to the same four players we have.
Which TV network is doing which New Year's Eve concert?
You had to bring that up. Nobody's going to get that, but.
Well, someone must have.
You had to get a deep cut.
Hozuf? No, that was TVN. No, wait, no, that.
Anyway.
Warsaw, right? No, wait, yeah.
Let me give you some numbers to tell you who's on top of this particular pile of cell phone operators in terms of customers. Number one in Poland today is Orange, with about 16 million customers. Number two, just behind them at 15.5 million, is Play. In third place with 13 million is Plus, and bringing up the rear at 11.5 million customers is T-Mobile.
And the thing with T-Mobile is they were, which used to be Era, they were the first ones to get 10 million subscribers in Poland, in 2005 or 6 or something like that, when they were still Era. So, they were the market leaders for years. And now, they're at the bottom of the pack. I mean, still, it's still a huge share. I mean, it's kind of.
I was thinking about this. Let me ask you guys if you can think of an example. Can you think of another product where every company that's offering it is, I'll say it a different way. All these four companies are offering a literally identical product. Yeah, I know technical specifications might be different. One company might have slightly faster downloads, but from the customer's perspective, they are identical products, access to a network. And I was thinking, is there another product where no matter what brand you buy, you're getting exactly the same thing? I thought about bottled water, but even that's not true. The water is different from one to another. Can you think of another product where it's literally identical? Petrol. What about claims of adding certain additives for performance?
As a consumer,
but those are like premium brands.
Yeah, true. Maybe gasoline, possibly.
Electricity, if you have choices for different providers in your home.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But I know what you're talking about.
It's a very unique market, a very unique industry where there's huge money at stake, and they're literally offering the exact same thing. Maybe in different terms, maybe slightly more attractive packages with this brand or that, but they're offering exactly the same thing. Let me give you some numbers that give you an idea of how much people move around. In the time you guys have had a phone number, have you changed providers keeping the same number?
Once.
You ever done that? Yeah?
3 times.
3 times? I've done it once. Happens a lot. And according to statistics for the government, because this has to be reported to the government for some reason, on average, about 3,000 numbers a day are switched from one network to, it's closer to 4,000. Yeah, about 360,000 per quarter. So, closer to 4,000 a day. But the weird thing is, with so many people changing brands, changing companies, you would think that maybe one company would benefit, they would gain more than the other. It's really not true. The biggest gain from the second quarter 2021, which is the most recent quarter for which we have statistics, the biggest winner was T-Mobile, who gained 5,000 customers. Again, 360,000 people changed. 5,000 was the biggest gain. So it's really weird.
And changing is when you don't have a contract, or if your contract is ending, it's not really that difficult. It's not much of a hassle. You just basically walk in. Here's my ID. I want my number to be switched over to you guys. And you're done.
But isn't it, sorry to interrupt, but I mean, the thing with changing your number is that you're without the use of your phone for 24 hours, 48 hours or so while the actual changeover is taking place.
I don't even know if that was an issue. Your phone still works. You just don't know who you were paying at that moment.
Right, okay.
But no, I don't remember having much of an issue when I switched over. But I switched over from Plus after literally 18, almost 20 years.
You see, I mean, you were asking about switching now. Like I said, I've had 3 different numbers, but actually, I mean, I've never taken a number from one provider to another. What's happened is that, for a long time I had a pay-as-you-go number, And then, I lost the phone, and so I needed to get a new phone and
you got
a new card.
number. You didn't change from
so
one
I've
country.
had 3 different numbers.
So you changed companies in the sense that you got a new number with a new company, but didn't move a number from one to another.
The regulation that changed, because like back in the day, you could walk into a kiosk and get a SIM card without like showing any ID, so you had a name, and unless you actually went to the
now
website
you got to be registered.
If you lost that SIM card, like that number was lost, you couldn't get it back. Otherwise.
Oh, and speaking of numbers, Dr. Mike, for anybody who doesn't know, tell us about the significance of the number that the digit that your phone number starts with.
In the beginning, you could actually tell which network somebody was on from their phone number. I believe that the 500s were Idea.
Yeah.
And the 600s are split between ETA and Plus, with the even numbers, I think, being ETA and the odd numbers being Plus.
When Heya came out, they were the 7s.
They were 7s, and then Play came out with the 800s.
Yes.
Because my Heya number started 886.
Yeah, but then it started switching around, then it started changing. And now, like, when you see somebody's phone number, you can guess their network, but you can no longer.
Yeah, so many people have changed. But if you have a phone number today that starts with a 5, and especially a 50, that is an old number. You've either had that number for ages, or somebody had it for a long time. It was recycled after they lost it, and now it's been put back into circulation on a prepaid or something like that. But if you have a number that starts with a 5, for sure, or a 6. Especially 60 something, that number is, I'd say, at least 15 years old.
Yeah, mine's 605. It's 23 years old now.
Like a classic number, then.
Mm-hmm. Classic number. Any final words on the cost of things, Dr. Mike?
This is actually something we talked about off the air earlier. In Poland, nowadays, cell numbers of mobile phones are dirt cheap compared to a lot of countries, especially the prepaid stuff. When here in Poland, as a subscriber with a contract, I'm paying around 30 zlotys a month for unlimited minutes, unlimited texts, and I don't even remember. I think like 45 gigabytes on my plan.
Plus, and you have to work hard to exceed your limit.
I have to work hard, and even in the EU, I think I have like 6 or 8 gigabytes of roaming. And if you do like a prepaid thing, you can pay less where you get less data, but still you're paying 20, 30 a month, and you're fine. I remember when I fly to the US and want to get a prepaid number, it's like $80 or something like that for like a few weeks. It's insane. It's like for that 2 or 3 weeks, I'm paying as much.
I have friends back in Florida who have subscription plans, so you would think that they would get a break on it, and they're still spending $100 or more a month, and I don't get it.
And they're getting like 8 gigs or 10 gigs, and they're happy.
Telecommunications there are crazy expensive. I don't know elsewhere. The Germans and their handies, I don't know how much they're paying for that.
I don't want to pay.
But I remember the early days when I had my phone number with Idea here in Poland. Spending less than 200 zlotys a month was actually difficult. And this is with a prepaid card, because I remember paying 2 zlotys or more per text message, 2 zlotys or more per minute. Oh, and by the way, one more thing I want to sneak in here. Mike, you remember this for sure. Josh, I'm not sure if you were here when this happened. In the early days, I can't remember if it was all networks or just Idea, but the first, I want to say 5 seconds, maybe 3 seconds, didn't count. Remember that? Remember when people get on the phone and go really quickly, hey, where are you at? Bye. I'm waiting for you. Bye. And you could have a conversation like that, because for whatever reason, the first, let's say 3 seconds didn't count. You remember this? This is 2099, maybe?
I don't remember this, but I can believe it. But I remember this is the difference between like the US and Europe or Poland, where when text messages started to become cheaper here, like, counting in grosses, while in the US, texting just wasn't a thing because it was expensive and people didn't use it. Plus, and then I found out in the US, a lot of people had free voicemail. So they'll leave voicemail for their friends. That person will listen at the voicemail and then respond to their voicemail. That was a cheap alternative for communicating.
What year did people start installing Facebook Messenger on their phones? When did that become a big deal?
We're talking late 2000s, 2010 later.
Does that sound right? Because that's basically an SMS killer, right?
Yeah, well,
Instagram,
that's WhatsApp and all those things.
WhatsApp, they're all.
The first one of those was Apple's in-house iMessage, which was free text messages to people who were also using iPhones, and then very, very quickly, it was taking advantage of, some other little wrinkle in the way the network worked.
Then you had BlackBerry as well that had its messaging system. So those are the mid-2000s, and then you had iMessage and WhatsApp later half of the 2000s. And then there was just an explosion of the instant messaging.
But these days,
they all use the internet. I mean, like WhatsApp and Messenger. So you either, if you're on Wi-Fi, obviously it goes through via Wi-Fi. If you're not on Wi-Fi, then it's still going through your mobile phone provider, but it's using up your gigabytes of allowance for Wi-Fi rather than your call or text message.
Do cell phone providers today even bother to tell you how many text messages are included in your package? I haven't checked.
It's all unlimited. Unless you buy a super cheap, like 5 zlotys a month plan, where
who uses SMSs these days, really?
You send them
to Polska.
Yeah. When your delivery's coming.
I'd say when it's strong winds and horrible weather.
The SMSs right now are like government. It's like mail. It's like who sends you mail? Usually like official stuff and government stuff. That's or bills.
Well, I mean, an important thing about SMSs, especially from this perspective, after the infrastructure has been in place for so long, is that they actually cost nothing. There is, nothing else is making way for, they use a tiny fraction of the bandwidth, which has always been like allocated for SMSs since the standard was initiated. So it's like there is no cost, and that's why, for example, like we get these weather alerts and things like that. The government can actually sort of, spray them out to all 4 mobile phone providers in the country, and they will just go.
Well, I imagine that's a condition of their license. Really,
actually, I remember that's a license, but that's kind of like in the U.S. when you had like the emergency number, whatever. But when you're talking about the SMSs, I don't remember the year of the first SMS, but I remember
getting one in my van in the mid '90s. This is in the UK.
I want to say it was 80s.
And I was thinking, what the hell's this?
So it was like it's exactly what you said. When it was in the UK, when some like engineer realized that he could send a bunch of information basically on the signal that was being sent back and forth between phones and
there was a character limit. I remember that.
And that was why there was a character limit, because he realized there was this much amount of information it's there. It's not being used for anything. We can send that.
And if you kept going, it would bleed over into a second message, much like Twitter today.
Yeah. It was like, I mean,
like Twitter is 144 characters because that was what the limit for text messages was back then. And so when carriers were charging you for this, it was kind of like, this is information that you're sending anyway. So besides the actual having a server to process it, there's no cost to you guys. So when they were charging multiple zlotys per one text, they were making a killing.
I mean, it's a little bit analogous to CFAX, that old kind of like sort of very, very primitive, text program information, weather and stuff that you could get on your old analog TV, because that was using like, a tiny fraction of the television wavelength that was like left over after it constructed your picture.
And now we get mad if our 5 gigabyte download takes more than 10 seconds. Actually, different world.
That's another thing I realized. They've gone from 4G to 5G and they're touting how fast it is. And I realized I don't really need my phone to be any faster. There's very few situations where if I have a full signal, I'm like, oh, this YouTube video is buffering 2.3 seconds. Yeah, but even if
doesn't your phone have to be equipped for 5G? You don't have a 5G phone, you can't use a 5G.
Well, yeah, what I'm saying is like they tout that 5G. It's like, oh, it's so much faster. It's like 4G. If my phone is already connected at 20 or 30 megabits per second, that's more than fast enough for all my media uses.
We're getting into overkill now, kind of like 8K television. 4K is enough.
Well, I think it's partly to do with things like kind of domestic hubs, and you got like iPods, and you're actually you want to watch a 4K video like while you're sitting on the bus. I don't know.
Oh, we're so spoiled these days.
Yeah,
spoiled for choice. Well, that is our short history of mobile phones in Poland. Hope you learned something. Hope you were able to follow it. It's a bit of a complicated family tree. Thanks for listening, everybody. KrakCast.pl is the website, of course. Check out all of our back episodes, and we'll see you next time on the KrakCast.